Cliff Tasner is a noted music composer, particularly for films and TV. And in addition to being president of ADA, he's formed a satirical singing group called the Billionaires, who think they own the country and the world. Trump could be their guru, but first, their creator, Cliff Tasner. Cliff Tasner, welcome to Connect the Dots.
Hi, Lila.
I always enjoy having you because I had your job for a while.
It's true.
In the 90s, when I was president of Americans for Democratic Action, and way before that, there was Eleanor Roosevelt who created Americans for Democratic Action. And most of those organizations, which are based on real ideals, don't really last unless they become actual political parties. But this is sort of an adjunct of the Democratic Party, even though it denies that. So why don't you tell us, before we begin our specific questions about the candidates running for president and other issues, describe Americans for Democratic Action to us. What is their agenda?
So Americans for Democratic Action is a multi-issue national organization, which, as you said, Eleanor Roosevelt founded it in 1947 and was still vibrant. We're still around. I'm the president of the Southern California chapter of ADA, but we have chapters in various places around the country. We even have a chapter in Iowa, which is very active, and we're hoping they'll play a big role in helping get us a progressive president. So that's what ADA is doing. A lot of the work we do is endorsing and helping candidates to win who are progressives, and then lobbying them and holding their feet to the fire on the progressive issues that we care about. That was our incentive for supporting them in the first place.
Funny you should say that, because this is the subject that we are going to approach today. We know there's more than a year ahead of us before the election, but we're being forced by the news to consider it as though it's tomorrow. So I have before me 20-something Democrats who are running for president. First of all, what do you think of that many people running for president? Do you think there should be a limit on the number of people who run
Well,
for president?
It's not a coronation, and you wonder why some of these people who are near the bottom in terms of the polls are running, but there's no law that says they can't run, and the question is, what will be the effect of them running? I mean, on some level, a lot of progressives are very excited about Bernie Sanders, and there is this kind of sense that given the new rules for superdelegates not being able to vote in the first round of voting, you almost get a sense that people were encouraged to run, so there'd be so many people running that even if, say, Bernie Sanders were in the lead coming into the convention next year, he might not have the majority of votes, and then in the second round, the superdelegates can come in and coronate another corporate centrist Democrat that is in line with the corporate donors of the Democratic Party.
So explain that to us again. How does that work? Let's say that Bernie Sanders on the first ballot does not win.
Yes, let's imagine, we don't even know what's going to happen. He may not even be in the running at that point. But let's say he gets 40% of the vote, and let's say he's the leading candidate.
Right.
The first round, the superdelegates, who are elected officials, who are party insiders,
Right.
who are often the people at odds. I want to sort of just point out, you see, the Republican Party is comprised of a troika of fundamentalist Christians, CEOs, the very wealthy, and white supremacists. And the fact is they're all working together, because the fundamentalist Christians are perfectly happy to see the rich get richer as long as they can also have a social sort of crusade against gay rights, a social crusade against women's reproductive rights. And so as much as, yes, they would be doing better economically if we had a progressive president and a progressive government that was doing something about wealth distribution, but they're willing to sacrifice their own comfort to push their evangelical agenda. And similarly, the white supremacists are perfectly happy to see the rich get richer and the poor get poorer as long as we can persecute people of color, as long as we can persecute immigrants, asylum seekers, Muslims. So the Democrats have more of a problem in that the corporate centrists who actually run our party, and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are a good example of this, but the people who fund them, these people are funded by corporations who also fund Republicans. And the fact is that the base of the Democratic Party, the vast majority, over 60% of the Democratic Party is actually progressive. These are people who want a $15 minimum wage, who want us to strengthen Social Security, who want Medicare for all, who don't want incrementalism, who want us to aggressively take on climate change with the Green New Deal. And unlike the Republican Party, where the base of their party is not at odds with the leadership of the party, the Democratic Party, the leadership of the party, is actually deliberately, aggressively at odds with the base of the party. There's a joke that somebody made, I forget who I should attribute it to, but it goes like this: the Republicans fear their base, the Democrats hate their base. And we see that again and again where we have foisted on us. You know, why did Hillary Clinton, after only barely winning the primary, choose an anti-abortion conservative Democratic senator to be her running mate rather than putting together some kind of unity ticket to give some people on the left incentive to support their ticket with more enthusiasm than they did? So this is the kind of battle right now. And the battle right now is kind of being staged in the person of Joe Biden, who is being anointed by the Democratic leadership, by the corporate media that supports them, by the corporations themselves that really are very comfortable with the status quo. The CEOs of big companies would be perfectly happy to let gay people marry as long as they can continue to cut taxes on the wealthy and raise the cost of living on the poor. The problem is the insurance companies give money to our elected officials, including Democrats, so they don't want to see Medicare for all. The fossil fuel companies give money to our elected officials, and they don't want to see a Green New Deal. And every one of these companies sure doesn't want to see a living wage and free college tuition, right, and possibly having them have to pay their share of taxes for all the benefits they've gotten from our society.
Now that you've brought up the subject of Joe Biden, I have before me the list of Democrats who are running for president. Let's go through a large part of this list using people who stand a fighting chance. You mentioned Joe Biden. It's amazing how all of them are sounding like socialists now. Suddenly, they're all for diversity.
Biden isn't sounding at all like a socialist. Today, he indicated that he would not want to repeal the Hyde Amendment. Joe Biden has always had an anti-abortion record. When Roe v. Wade was decided, Joe Biden gave a speech where he said that women should not have the right to control their own bodies.
That's right.
And he is all throughout the 80s, the 90s, Joe Biden continued to vote against abortion rights, and today he actually said that he would keep the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment is this very egregious amendment that keeps even a penny of money being spent to provide abortions for poor women, and also no money can go overseas to support any kind of family planning that even mentions abortion. And Biden will stick with that because he's a conservative. He's not a moderate. He's not a centrist. He's a conservative Democrat. He has an anti-choice, anti-women record. And that also came to fruition when Anita Hill testified before the Senate Judicial Committee that Joe Biden was the chair of, where she told everybody that Clarence Thomas had been sexually harassing her and making inappropriate comments. And there were 3 or 4 other women who could corroborate that. And Joe Biden wouldn't let any of them testify. And he had promised his Republican friends that he would push the Clarence Thomas vote through as quickly as possible. And so we've been saddled with one of the worst Supreme Court justices in the history of the United States. So that's Joe Biden's anti-choice record. He has a racist record. He made a speech where he said that just because the black man has suffered 300 years of oppression doesn't mean we should hold the white man back or force him to compromise or do anything to disadvantage him in any way. And he, in fact, teamed up with Strom Thurmond and Jesse Helms on anti-busing, anti-integration legislation. He was a warmonger. He was the head of the Senate Armed Services Committee in the run-up to the Iraq War, and because he was pro-war, he made a point of not letting any of the rational people that we know were right testify about how destructive the war would be. So he helped ram through the war. He was a big advocate because he comes from Delaware, where all these credit card companies like MNBA, he was very much responsible for helping George Bush pass the bankruptcy bill. And on another racial issue, everybody vilified Hillary Clinton for supporting the crime bill in the 90s. Well, the author of that bill was Joe Biden. And then there's the kind of weird thing where he has this tendency to walk up behind women, massage their backs, and smell their hair, which just happened 2 weeks ago. He was speaking before the school teachers, and a 10-year-old girl spoke, and he said to everybody, well, I'll bet you're as smart as you are pretty. And then he grabbed her shoulders, gave her a little back rub, and smelled her hair. Right. So he's really a terrible candidate. It would be like even worse than the last Democratic candidate. But the Democratic establishment wants to push him through. And my thought is, over time, more and more constituencies that the Democrats count on are going to start to see. Cory Booker's called him out for his racism. Today's standing with the Hyde Amendment has got to be a reminder to women that do you really want to support the guy who's had such an anti-abortion record? But he is the guy to beat at this point.
Getting back to my point that he's sounding more and more liberal, I have in front of me today, and this is Wednesday, June 5th, an article in the New York Times that says Biden cites Green New Deal, an ambitious plan for climate.
Except the plan he's pushing through isn't the Green New Deal. It's actually a watered-down version of the Green New Deal that would continue to use nuclear energy, that would continue fracking, that would be more about transitional technologies. And we are dealing with the kind of climate emergency that we can't afford to screw around anymore. We really have to tackle this aggressively, and we need to change our behavior. We need to make sacrifices, or we're not going to have a civilization, a species, a planet to live on.
Yeah, but right now, what we're talking about, Cliff Tasner, president of Americans for Democratic Action in Southern California, we're talking about the fact that he's sounding more and more liberal. I want to make it clear that once people are running, they suddenly change their tunes in a way that is absolutely shocking. And Joe Biden is among them. Now, this says, when Joseph Biden was Barack Obama's vice president, their administration brokered the landmark Paris Climate Accord and imposed the nation's first federal regulations for cutting carbon dioxide emissions. Now, as Mr. Biden runs for president, he has laid out an ambitious climate plan of his own that goes well beyond what Mr. Obama achieved, proposing $1.7 trillion in spending and a tax or fee on planet-warming pollution, with the aim of eliminating the nation's net carbon emissions by 2050. Now, I remember Joe Biden when he had no interest in this. None at all. He was strictly corporate. He couldn't have cared less.
He's saying these things, but the very fact that he even says 2050 is way too late. We really need in the next 10 years to absolutely stop pumping all this carbon. And also, his plan, if you look at it closely, relies a lot on hypothetical technologies that haven't even been developed, like carbon capture. This isn't even something that has been even developed. You know, it's like calling clean coal. There's no such thing. Right. Other than a branding.
Well, let's agree that Joe Biden is a hypocrite. And when he can get away with it, he changes his position. He's now suddenly for universal health care.
Once again, when they say that, as opposed to Medicare for all,
right,
it's a centrist line that means that everybody will have the freedom to pay money to buy health care. No one will be prevented from buying health care if they can pay for it. So universal health care is what you'll hear centrist Democrats say, rather than Medicare for all, which is where we set up a fair tax system and people pay their share and everyone is provided health care without copayments, without deductibles, without premiums.
Okay, so let's agree on this, Cliff Tasner. Joe Biden is not our idea of a Democrat. He's our idea more of a moderate Republican. And that takes care of Joe Biden.
But also, he's somebody who will probably lose to Trump. Because once again, the corporate centrists who run the Democratic Party keep using this idea of triangulation that Bill Clinton perfected, which is where Bill Clinton would move way to the right on an issue like NAFTA, like welfare reform, like the telecommunications bill that made it so Rupert Murdoch could own so many stations, like the mandatory minimum sentences. And the argument would be, well, this way I get some moderate Republicans supporting me, and then the rest of you on the left of me have nowhere to go. You could vote with me or you could vote with these fascists over here. And you know what? It doesn't work anymore. If you can't inspire the people who know that we need real change in terms of our political system, our environment, our medical delivery system, we can't do incrementalism anymore. In spite of how bad Trump is, there's a lot of people, if Joe Biden is the candidate, who maybe they'll go out and vote for him, but they're not going to get on the phone and call people, and they're not going to walk precincts, and they're not going to get involved. And it's just going to be a campaign where big donors run ads on TV that most people tune out. So,
okay, let's get off Joe Biden, because there are a number of people who are much better than he, and let's go through them.
There are definitely.
Let's begin with Kamala Harris. She's a United States Senator from California, and she was Attorney General for California. And what is your opinion?
She was also the DA for San Francisco. And the thing is, as a senator, she's been great in hearings where she's been a prosecutor grilling some of Trump's appointees, including Brett Kavanaugh. Her record hasn't been incredibly stellar. And one thing that is a real caution to the left is, as the Attorney General of California, she didn't go after the banksters who destroyed our economy in 2008. And one of the people who was destroying our economy is Steve Mnuchin, who is now the Secretary of the Treasury.
Right.
He's a big donor of hers. He donated to her campaign for the Attorney General. He donated to her campaign for Senator. And she did not go after him, and he supported her. And the thing is, I like what she's saying now. She's somebody who's smart enough to lick her finger and put it in the air and see which way the wind is blowing. So she's running on a lot of progressive issues. She's a charismatic individual running on progressive issues that she recently discovered. I'm glad she's running on them. I think that's great. I think I'd be more likely to trust a candidate who has been pushing progressive issues for their whole career rather than someone who just realized that this is the zeitgeist, and if I want to distinguish myself in a Democratic Party that's pushing a Joe Biden, I've got to run to the left.
Now let's talk about someone who has been pushing progressive issues economically, but hasn't been that anti-war. Elizabeth Warren, how do you feel about her?
Well, she's not the candidate I'm most in favor of. However, I like her. I'm thrilled that she's coming out with these really comprehensive policy papers on real constructive plans on, let's say, here's one, making it so legislators can't leave their jobs as representatives or senators and then become lobbyists for corporations. She's got another plan that I like quite a bit that echoes what they do in Europe, where 40% of corporate boards would have to be made up of actual employees, workers from those companies. She's got another one that's an ultra-millionaire tax. I think over $50 million a year, you'd pay like 1 or 2%, and it would raise a whole bunch of money for education. So she's got a lot of good ideas. I'm glad we're having this conversation. I think that she represents some very good views. For me, I myself am actually supporting Bernie Sanders. And part of that, if Elizabeth Warren had been the candidate last time and had built a huge base of volunteers and a huge campaign apparatus, I'd probably be supporting her now. But I don't think she has as good a chance of beating Trump because she's starting from ground zero. But I'm so thrilled that she's putting out all these position papers and real constructive plans that the next progressive Democratic president, if we get one, can use whether or not it's her. So I'm thrilled about that.
Her guts are absolutely indescribable. I mean, she stood up for impeachment before anyone did.
I really like her.
She really knows no fear. Unfortunately, she has a father and 2 brothers who are in the military, and she sometimes does numbers about them fighting for their country instead of fighting for the arms industry.
Well, it might be that that's something that resonates with a lot of middle Americans talking about patriotism.
Well, we know that,
times,
but, we're talking about our opinion.
Yes, it won't resonate with us. We know
she has come out against the extra $16 billion that Trump now wants to put into the military. And she has come out against Saudi Arabia continuing to shower bombs over Yemen. So
I think it's wonderful, and I think she's one of the very few credible progressives running in this race.
Now, what about Pete Buttigieg? Now, he's an interesting candidate. He was the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. He's extremely charming. He's openly gay, and he sounds very progressive. Is he?
So Pete Buttigieg is a very articulate, charismatic. I think he was a Rhodes Scholar. He served in the military. He's a unicorn in that he's a gay evangelical Christian, which is an astounding kind of thing. And my concern with Mayor Pete is he's saying a lot of great stuff, but he's speaking the same way Obama did in very vague generalities without actual policies. And he's saying a lot of what we want to hear. We worked for the McKinsey Group, which is a very secretive corporate consulting firm for many years. He's getting a lot of money from them. And I'm not as excited when somebody is, evangelical. As far as if we're talking about who can beat Trump, the idea that maybe evangelicals are going to support him, I don't think they will, because one of the big issues for evangelicals is their homophobia.
Yeah.
So I don't know that he's a progressive. I don't sense that he is. I sense he's more very, very charismatic, middle-of-the-road guy who recognizes, just like Obama did, that you need to say the kind of things that progressives will hear what they want to hear. And if you look, it's all very vague generalities.
But he does say it charmingly, we have to admit.
He's very charismatic.
How about Beto O'Rourke? I mean, he was dazzling when he ran in Texas for the Senate, and he's still kind of dazzling. He calls more people than anybody else, spends more time talking to people, and you get a feeling that he's a real populist. Beto O'Rourke of Texas. What do you think?
Beto O'Rourke was a fairly conservative Democratic congressman. He took on Ted Cruz, and he really did better than anybody ever thought he could. And I think he would have made a great senator from Texas, and his centrist politics would fit very well in that state as a state that's red that could transform itself to blue over the next few years. He's not a progressive. His voting record is not progressive, and he's also been falling in the polls since, the initial bump when he entered the race. But, he doesn't have a progressive record. I'm sorry he's not running for Senate next year because the other Texas senator is going to be up for re-election, and Beto would be a really great senator to challenge him because it's not enough to elect a Democratic president. We need to get the Senate back, or that president is not going to be able to do anything.
Let's talk about a couple of other people who have kind of a snowball's chance in hell. Let's say Kirsten Gillibrand. I'm not sure she has a snowball's chance in hell, but she was one of the few people running, in fact, the only person running, who voted against the original $700 billion defense budget. And there were only 4 Democrats that voted against it. And Kirsten Gillibrand was one of them. What's your opinion?
So Kirsten Gillibrand was a conservative Democratic congresswoman who got a 100% rating from the NRA. Once she became senator, she actually changed her politics to reflect what New York is actually about rather than her very western, rural New York district that she'd represented. She's saying a lot of great stuff. She's running on a lot of good issues today. She finally came out with a comprehensive legalization of marijuana plan. The only thing is she's so low in the polls, no one's paying any attention to her. I suspect that a lot of Democrats are very bitter that she was the one who pushed Al Franken out for sophomoric inappropriate behavior toward women, which isn't quite Harvey Weinstein or Louis C.K. level of inappropriate. But she's saying a lot of great things, and I like that she's in the race, and I like that she's saying what she's saying.
Well, you can say the same thing about Marianne Williamson, although she always was a progressive, but she's very progressive now. She really doesn't have a chance. What about Amy Klobuchar? She's a senator from Minnesota.
Amy Klobuchar is a conservative Democrat. She makes a lot of speeches where she laughs at the idea of Medicare for all or a Green New Deal, and she poo-poos it and suggests, well, it's not like money grows on trees. It would be lovely to live in a world where these things were possible, but they're not. So here's a whole bunch of really cautious, incrementalist, pro-corporate agenda items that I've got that will be better than Donald Trump.
So much for her. Now, let's really get to the person that we're passionate about. I just want
to say something about a couple other people.
Okay.
Cory Booker was probably the biggest recipient of Wall Street money as a senator, and he's running as a more progressive presidential candidate. But, do you really want to trust the guy who got all that money from Wall Street? I do like that he's calling out Joe Biden for a history of racism. That seems a lot more credible coming from an African American than it does coming from, say, Bernie Sanders.
Unless there's somebody else that you are dying to discuss, let's get to the man that we all adore, Bernie Sanders.
Well, I'm very excited about Bernie Sanders' campaign. I think if you really look at this, the 2 people who have the most credibility as progressives are Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And the thing about Bernie Sanders is he is running on all the issues we care about. He's running on a Green New Deal. He's running on Medicare for all. He's running on $15 minimum wage. He's running on strengthening Social Security, making the rich people pay their fair share of taxes. He's actually taken foreign policy seriously this time. He is talking about real Middle Eastern peace and acknowledging the Palestinians as people who are entitled to a right to exist. So Bernie Sanders is a very exciting candidate. He excites young people. I think he scares the bejesus out of corporate Americans who would rather live in a dictatorship with Donald Trump than live in a just, equitable society that's on its way to doing something about carbon with Bernie Sanders. And the thing is, he excites the base of the party. And the challenge will be, can he withstand the juggernaut of negative press that he's getting? Politico, which is a kind of centrist Democratic political magazine, just did a very blatantly anti-Semitic article about Bernie. It was complaining Bernie sold a book and made some money, so he made about $2 million one year. And so they're now saying, well, he's a millionaire and he's a cheapskate. It said, Bernie's rich, but he's cheap. And it had a picture of Bernie with a money tree behind him. It was such an incredible anti-Semitic trope where you see they're attacking Ilhan Omar for criticizing AIPAC, which is a right-wing Israeli government lobbying arm that basically focuses its energy on recruiting evangelical Christians to support the Israeli settlement project. But they don't attack Politico for blatant anti-Semitism against Bernie Sanders, And the point is, can he withstand? The New York Times is constantly running articles against him. and it will take people power if there's any chance that he's going to be elected. But I am of the opinion that he is the only one running who can beat Donald Trump. And there's this trope that's being put out by the centrists that it's not important that the person stand for anything. What's most important is that they can beat Donald Trump. So Joe Biden, who stands on none of the issues Democrats want, would be okay if he could beat Donald Trump. It's not enough to beat Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the head of a hydra that has 8 more heads, basically. Before Donald Trump came on the scene, Mitch McConnell was running the Senate in a way to prevent Obama from getting anything done. They've changed the rules. They've gerrymandered. They've disenfranchised people. They've made it harder for people to vote. They've stolen elections by tilting the playing field in such a way that it makes it easier for them to win and harder for us to win. And the kind of changes they're making to our democracy, they're fatal, destructive moves that they've made. And unless we get somebody who really stands for something, it's not enough to get rid of Donald Trump. And Joe Biden's idea that the Republicans will suddenly sober up when he wins is not true. You know, if he did manage to win and the Republicans hold on to the Senate, they're going to be hauling him in there again and again and again and ruining his life.
So let's agree that the 2 top contenders, in terms of what you're describing, and I'm not supposed to express my opinion, you know.
Right.
But I think maybe my listeners sort of suspect my opinion.
Really, though, Lila, it's about issues.
I understand.
People on the left, we're not about personalities. You know, if Bernie Sanders came out today and said that he would keep the Hyde Amendment, I think there's a lot of people who'd be like, well, I don't want to support you. Or he wants to transition very gently to, you know, a Green New Deal. If Bernie Sanders abandoned the politics and the policies that those of us on the left have been working for generations, we wouldn't be interested in him at all as a candidate.
As a candidate, he's absolutely untouchable as a candidate. So what you're telling us is that ADA will probably endorse Bernie Sanders.
Well, I do want to say ADA SoCal has actually endorsed Bernie Sanders. The issue is whether the national organization will. And in fact, the national organization endorsed him last time. Yeah. But once again, the reason we endorsed him, it's not about the cult of personality. It's not that we find him charming. He's kind of gruff and he's not warm and fuzzy at all. You know, I don't want to elect somebody who's my buddy that I can have a beer with, like George Bush. Apparently people thought they could have a beer with him. I want to elect somebody who's going to save our democracy, save our planet, save our society, save the world, you know.
Yeah, well, those are modest desires, so we'll join you in all of that. Okay, so for the moment, Cliff Tasner, that's it for the future election, which is not too much in the future, so we'll be back to it many times. But let's talk about the election we just had. We were asked to vote on Measure EE, which was a measure to support our public schools, and it lost badly. Tell us why.
Okay, so Measure EE would have been a very small parcel tax per square foot that probably would have cost most homeowners maybe less than $50 a year, and it would have represented something like $500 million for the schools every year. Right. And bear in mind that the schools in California are some of the worst funded schools in the nation. And this is, of course, as a result of Prop 13, which I don't know that we need to talk a lot about. But one of the stipulations of Prop 13 is you can't raise taxes without a 2/3 vote anywhere. So we have occasionally reached that margin. We okayed a certain amount of money for the homeless this way. We okayed a tax that helps pay for transportation this way. The thing is that without a 2/3 vote, so it's not a lot of money for homeowners. It's a lot more money for commercial business owners who don't want to pay their share. So they put their money into various organizations to terrify people about a tax increase.
Exactly. That's exactly what they did.
Right.
And they have done it forever, it seems to me.
And the Howard Jarvis people were out and putting out propaganda like, oh, we give so much money to the schools and there's no accountability. Well, finally, thanks to the election of Jackie Goldberg, we elected an actual progressive who is going to hold the corporate charter schools' feet to the fire. We do have accountability now, but we don't have enough money. We spend less per student than most states in the country, except for like Alabama and Mississippi. This is blue California, because the Republicans have written into law ways to make our state ungovernable and prevent our legislature from actually legislating.
So then also this is an indication that the progressives in the Democratic Party are not actually getting their message out. But they did get their message out about someone who's running for the city council. Tell us about that.
Well, this is very exciting. Council District 12 was represented by Mitch Englander, who was the lone Republican on the city council. The district has more Republicans per square foot than the other parts of the city, and yet it still has a majority of Democrats. There are more Democrats than Republicans, but they've had a Republican represent Dennis Zine, Mitch Englander. He stepped down so he could be the lobbyist for a corporation. So Dr. Lorraine Lundquist, who is a real, absolute, thorough, consistent, progressive activist on environmental issues. She's actually a professor of aeronautics, I believe, and she's been doing a lot of activism around the Aliso Canyon gas well spill. And she just made the runoff against a conservative Republican, a guy named Lee, who's the chief of staff for Mitch Englander. And he happens to have a number of people who've come forward who said that he's sexually harassed them. And so it's a majority Democratic district, and it is going to be possible in August. I think it's August 24th is the runoff. It is possible that L.A. City will elect the first Democrat from that district in a long time, and not just a Democrat. She would be one of the most progressive members of the city council that we've seen in the history of Los Angeles.
Let's have her name one more time.
Dr. Lorraine Lundquist. So it's going to be a tough race because it's a fairly conservative district. Even the Democrats there are a little more conservative. But she made the runoff, and she did really well. She only got 50 votes less than this guy.
Okay, so now you are a wonderful musician and a composer, and very successful, we have to say. And you have a group called the Billionaires, a satirical group of singers, and you write the lyrics, and they're just terrific. And we want to play one of your songs. It's a parody of This Land Is My Land.
Yeah, it's called This Land Is Our Land. It's from the point of view of the Koch brothers. And I just want to say the singer is the late, great Steve Coleman, who we lost last September, and a lot of Kpfk listeners will recognize his voice. He was a wonderful singer, and he's very much missed.
This land is your land, who are we kidding? We own your Congress, they do our bidding. Your head keeps spinning while we keep winning. This land belongs to him and me. This land is our land, this land is our land. It is not your land, because it's our land. Because we bought it, that's why it's our land. This land belongs to him and me. We are the dealer for this great nation. We overcharge you for medication. We get rich quicker if you get sicker. This land belongs to him and me. How we keep testing your soul's endurance. You pay us money for health insurance, which we're denying until you're dying. This land belongs to him and me. We own the farmlands, it's worth repeating. We put corn syrup in what you're eating. Keep getting fatter, 'cause you don't matter. This land belongs to him and me. This land is our land, this land is our land. It is not your land, because it's our land. Because we bought it, that's why it's our land. This land belongs to him and me. We make the weapons for your invasions. We treat your wars as special occasions. More death than dying is what you're buying. This land belongs to him and me. Though global warming could cause a riot, we pump your oil, so we deny it. And we keep earning from fuel you're burning. This land belongs to him and me. We own the airwaves, the cable stations. They do the shilling for corporations. And all our minions spout our opinions. This land belongs to him and me. This land is our land, this land is our land. It is not your land, because it's our land. Because we bought it, that's why it's our land. This land belongs to him and me. Freedom is now no longer free. Please pass the profits on to me. Welcome to our plutocracy.
You've been listening to a satirical song. The words have been written by Clifford Tasner. Of course, you know the tune. It's a well-known folk song. And we thank him and his brilliant group, the Billionaires, for giving us the opportunity to laugh at our misery.
Let's change the world to a better place, with air we can breathe, clean water and space. A world without war, a world without race. Let's make the world a much better place.
And that's our show for today. We thank our guests, Norman Solomon, co-founder of RootsAction.org, and Cliff Tasner, president of Southern California Americans for Democratic Action.